Rejection can be defined as the act of pushing someone or something away. Join me right here on Transforming Minds with Lisa as we explore the topic of rejection. Good morning and welcome to another episode of Transforming Minds with Lisa. Today we'll be addressing a sensitive topic, the topic of rejection. And in studio I have with me NATASHA GOSLIN, and she'll be sharing her testimony of how she would have overcome rejection. NATASHA, welcome to Transforming Minds.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to ask you to start this morning by sharing with our viewers your testimony. I'm going to ask you some questions in between, so just to try not to lose your train of thought. But I'm going to try my best to pull out some of the questions that I believe my viewers may want to know as you share.
No problem.
All right, so go on ahead and share with us.
Okay, so where do I start? I basically dealt with rejection from the time I was a child, basically from as far as I can remember. My mother would have had me at a very young age, and in that scenario, my grandmother would have been the one to take me even from QEH, so that's from a babe.
Okay.
So she would have taken me to her home, and that grandmother would have been my father's mother. And as I said, she would have raised me. And during that time, I always had a lot of dreams of being with my mother, and obviously hopes and stuff, because you go to school and you see other children with their parents around, and I always felt like there was just this emptiness, and I'm like, I found myself crying a lot at nights, especially when I was in my room alone, and I'll be like, why am I crying? There wasn't anything I could pinpoint that had happened to me during the day that would warrant me crying, but yet still I had many nights of just crying and feeling this sense of not belonging, so to speak, and I could not understand it because I would have been pretty young.
So let me ask you a question now. Was your mother, did you at any point in time, did you get to go see your mother, or was she coming over to visit you?
That happened when I was probably in I would say class 2. I got to visit my mother, and that was always a joy for me because, as I said, I wanted to be with my mother. And it's not to say that the home that I was being brought up in was not a home filled with love and comfort and stuff, because it was. But there was always that emptiness within me. So yes, I did get to visit my mom. Hardly there was ever a time where she came over, but I would get to go. But it was always a timed visit. So my grandmother would say, well, you get to go from this time to this time and bring her back by this time. And for me, it was a good thing, yet still I didn't want the time to end, so to speak, because I just wanted to be with my mother. And at that time as well, one of my sisters, she would have been living with my mother because my other siblings weren't born at that time as yet. But it was always, why can't I just stay with her? Why can't I just visit my grandmother and live with my mother? So it was hard for me as a child.
So this relationship that you started to develop with your mother, you said around class 2, so that's around the age of
That's like
9, 8, 9?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, and by that time your mother had another child.
Yes, my sister.
And she was living at the house with your mother.
Yeah.
So how did that make you feel?
I battled with so many feelings because it was like I was happy to be with my mom and my sister, but at the same time I became jealous of my sister because in my mind here's my sister enjoying what I wanted to enjoy, like to be there with my mother, having my mother hug me, having her read me stories at night, all these things I pictured because in my mind I saw basically visions of what I expected my mother to be, and the fact that she wasn't there in the picture, as in I wasn't living with her, it really crushed me. And as I said, in primary school I didn't realize the powerful impact and effect it had on my life, because as I said, I spent many nights crying, and I tell you crying, and people always would say, you're so emotional, you cry at everything, but they did not understand. Even though I am still emotional and people still don't understand. But for me as a child, it was very hard, because then I developed this thing where I just saw myself as just being different, and things would never change for me because that's how I am and I can't control it, and people genuinely cannot see what I am facing or what I am dealing with. So as a child, it was so hard because it's like, who do you talk to? Like, nobody will understand. Because if I tell my grandmother, I want to live with my mother. And I think I actually did tell her at some point that I would like to live with my mother. And she obviously didn't take me seriously because that's my granny. She's the one that raised me.
Yes.
So it's and I must add as well, my father, which was my grandmother I'm living with, he was living right next door, but he wasn't in the picture either. And I also had the picture perfect visions of what I expected a father to be like, and I didn't get that from him. And I saw other kids with their father, and once again, that feeling of rejection, which I didn't know it was at that time, overtook me, and I would be thinking, like, why is it about me that neither my mother or my father wanted me? And that was hard for a child to cope and to understand, but that was my reality. And as I said, there was no one I thought at that time that I could talk to that would understand what I was dealing with. So it was very, very hard.
So for someone who's listening, you said he lived right next door.
Right next
door.
So,
I mean, like, you live in next door. Why wasn't it possible for us to have a relationship?
So yes, my dad basically literally lived next door. I come out of my house, go down the stairs, turn, and my father's house was right there next door. So for me, my father was an alcoholic, and I guess my grandmother would have wanted to shield me from his behavior whenever he was drunk and stuff. So I was basically sheltered and protected from my father, even though he was there. And I would often hear comments and stuff like, I hope you will never be like your father and even your mother. I would hear that so very often, not necessarily in my home situation, but like people from the community and stuff, that because it's a close-knit community, everybody knows everybody. And I would hear stuff like that. But for me, my father in my eyes was a hero. He's my father, and my mother was like the queen. That's how I view them. And the fact that nobody could understand how much I wanted and how much I desired to be with my parents. Not necessarily have them together, which would have been a plus, but just to have that close relationship with them, and more so to be living with my mother. I didn't mind if my father came to visit, but my desire was to just live with my mother, because I saw that as like my comfort and something a child should have. And I felt robbed and stripped of that opportunity. And there were actually times when I felt as though my grandmother was being unfair by keeping me, and not understanding that that wasn't the case, because she obviously would have felt at the time of my birth that she would have been the one that was more fit to raise me, because as I said, my mother had me at a young age. And it is only but as I got older, then I recognized, you know what, God actually had a plan for my life. From the time my grandmother came and took me from QEH, the things I was sheltered from because I lived with her, the things that I was set apart from, I only understood that as an adult, because basically as a child that meant nothing to me. For somebody to tell me so, I'd be like, whatever, they don't understand. Everybody's just trying to keep me from my mother, keep me from my happiness, keep me from being normal, because I did not feel normal seeing other children and how they I even got to a point in primary school where I started to make up stories, because children would come to school after the weekend. Oh, my mommy took me to blah blah blah, we had so much fun watching this family movie. And so I started creating my own stories, my fairy tale, but
of what you wanted.
Of what I wanted.
To be.
So I would say things like, oh, I watched a movie with my mommy last night and we fell asleep, and stuff like that. So it became almost a norm for me to make up stories about my mother and I, because that's what I longed for. That's what I wanted so much. And the fact that it didn't happen just kept breaking me. And as I said, I went into a lot of crying and being emotional at almost everything. And then whenever I met children at school, in primary school still, who always seemed down or was basically ostracized for whatever reason, I was drawn to those children. Anybody that was different per se or treated differently, I was naturally drawn to them, and I was able to actually help them and not help myself because of what they were going through. They naturally spoke to me about things, and I literally felt what they were going through. And that was a lot to handle, because it was almost like I'm dealing with my own issues, but I'm also taking on issues from other children my age. And for a child, that is definitely a lot. And it was for me, because there were times when I felt, you know what, this world would be a better place if I did not exist, because my mother clearly didn't want me. That's why I'm not living with her. My father, same thing. My grandmother is just basically facilitating me because my parents didn't want me. So it would be a better place for me if I did not exist, if I was no longer in this world. So I battled with suicidal thoughts. Many nights I saw myself doing things to myself, and each time I thought about it, I remember so clearly my grandmother would come to the bedroom, and it was almost like I was saying no, that God showed her to go to me, and she would come and say something, whatever it was, and I'll be like, okay, those thoughts just went through the door. And then it'll be morning, because most of those thoughts came at night when I was by myself, laying down in my bed, and I'm crying. I'm like, it makes no sense, because I can never get what I want, and what I wanted is my parents, and that wasn't happening. And it was really, really, really hard. And fast forwarding into class 4, that was like a joyous breakthrough for me, because here I am graduating, and I found out my mother was coming, and that's the only thing I could think about. And I'm like, you're graduating. Like, everybody's fussing about their white dress, because we were wearing white dresses with these sashes and stuff, and all the kids talking about this, and all I can focus on is the fact that my mother is coming to my graduation. So for me, that's like, it was almost like I won $1 million because my mommy, my queen, she is coming to my graduation. And I was heavily involved in the arts in primary school. So it was like dancing, singing and stuff like that. So every act they had at graduation was basically a part. And I remember crying for the whole time through everything. Like, I saw nobody else in the crowd but my mother. That's the reality.
Your queen was present.
Yes, I just saw it. It was like a heavenly glow on this lady. That's how it was for me, because I'm like, you know, like how some people glow when celebrities are in the room. Well, that's how it was for me in class 4 at my graduation. And I saw, and then after graduation, when she embraced me, it was like, and actually, to be honest, I don't think my mother had ever actually hugged me till that day. That was the first time I actually remembered a physical, like, warm embrace, to the point where it did something for me. Like, there was just this release in me, like, oh my gosh, this is something that I longed for so many years, and it's finally here. I didn't want the moment to end, anything like that. And obviously it had to end because I was going to my house and she was going to hers. So the whole thing continued through secondary school, and I found that, as I mentioned before, I was always drawn to people that were deemed as different. There were people in secondary school, I don't know if it's safe to say, like Muslims. Those were my closest friends most of the times, and up to now I still have a friend that we connect with, that I connect with and stuff. But it was always people that, what you would call different, that I was drawn to. And as I said, I would understand how they felt and literally feel it. And the more I met people, like, I would go to concerts and I would start to cry from the time I enter a room, and I'm like, just so.
This is what age now?
This is secondary school.
Okay. Rejection. All the pain, the hurt, the trauma that it causes to an individual. But we don't have to stay in that place of feeling separated, isolated, and rejected. There's hope. Jesus Christ promised that he will never leave us, neither will he forsake us. Let's cling to him today. Let's trust him to bring us from that place. Let's be overcomers as it relates to rejection. And the temptation will come again. So just because you have overcome one hurdle doesn't mean a second wouldn't come. But that too you can conquer. Luke tells us that when the devil had ended all his temptation, he left Jesus for a season. We are no different. Rejection will come knocking at our doors again, whether it be through a family member, whether it be through the loss of a job or the breaking up of a relationship. But know this one thing, that God is still with us. He loves us. He loves us. And he promises that it doesn't matter what we go through, that he is with us all the way. All right, so at no point in time did any of your teachers recognize, or you felt comfortable enough to reach out to any of them?
In primary school, I would say there was this one teacher, which would have been my class 4 teacher, and also my lessons teacher, that would basically kind of try to shelter me, because obviously everybody would have known the emotional side of me, because I cried very easily. He would tell me, move that, and if I think it was a tone that was really harsh, I would start to cry, but I'm going to move it, but start to cry. And that one teacher, I would say she tried to, but I couldn't relate to her, because in my mind, she's not going to understand. So I didn't used to share my feelings. I kept everything inside. Everything was bottled inside because I already had in my mind nobody was gonna understand because I'm different and it makes no sense. So did
you find yourself then continuing with your stories as your fairy tale life when you got into secondary school?
After that, I would say graduation day, I think that did it for me because it was like, well, this was a breakthrough. My mother was there. She was there for the whole time. Like, she didn't come and leave. She was there and she embraced me, and I felt the love of my mother. I literally felt it when she held me in her arms. So for me, that was my breaking point. Like, she's a part of my life. Yes, we're not living together, but she's a part of my life, and I know my mommy loves me, so I don't need to make up stories about her and myself. And then too, I got more liberty or release from my grandmother to go more often with her, because I guess because of the age thing, I was more responsible, or I don't know what my grandmother felt, but I got to spend more time with her. So she would take me places, my sister, and then by then she would have had another daughter, my other sister. So it was me and my sisters and my mother. So it was like family unit and stuff. And as I said, my dad was still there, still not in the picture, still not supporting, but he had this thing. He would always say, "I love you, Tashibu," because that's what he called me. But he said it always when he was drunk. So, but for me, I took it because that's all I had. That's all I had, and it meant something for me, even though I longed for when he was sober that he would say these words to me. But like I said, I took that and I held it close because he said it. My father said it, and I also had visions of him when I would grow up and have my grandchildren, and they would sit on his lap, and I dream a lot and I have a lot of visions. And
you look forward to having your own children and just sitting on his lap.
And I also had this thing that I was going to have 7 daughters, a netball team, but thank God I've seen the light. But I saw my 7 children around my dad and him embracing them and giving them rides on his knees, all those things that I didn't have, but I desired and longed for as a child. So I had this picture perfect thing in my head that this was going to happen. It didn't happen for me, but when I grew up and I got my kids, this was going to happen. And sadly, that wasn't the case in terms of my dad, because he would have passed when I was probably 20, I think it was. And I wasn't even in Barbados when he had passed. I was on holiday in New York, and the amazing thing about that is that my husband then, who would have been my friend at the time, he was in New York at the same time. Yes. We were both on holiday, not staying in the same place, but we were friends, like I said. And my father died, and it was almost that I knew when it had happened before I actually got the call, because we were at a family gathering and we were in the pool, and then I felt this thing in my stomach and I started to cry in the pool. Everybody was like, "She's so strange," and I got that a lot, so it was nothing new to me. So I got out the pool and I went by myself, and I was like, why am I crying? Why am I feeling this way? And then within the next few minutes, we got the call that he had died. So I knew what I felt was connected to my dad's passing. And that holiday was a holiday I was really looking forward to, but it had to come to an end before it actually really got started. And obviously I had to come back to Barbados. And like I said, the amazing thing for me is that my friend then, which is my husband now, he opted to come back with me to be my support then. He was probably pulling in some plugs there, but it worked. But yeah, so he also stopped his holiday short so that he could come back and be my support and stuff like that. And even at the funeral, as I looked at my father laying in the coffin, it was a battle, because I was like, I saw everything die. Like all my dreams, all my hopes, everything I never got was there laying before me, and there was nothing I could do. And I felt like a total failure. When I tell you total failure, this thing like broke me in a way that I had never been broken before, because it was like nothing made sense to me anymore, because that hope, any form of hope that I had, I saw laying in the coffin for every aspect of my life. So from there, I had made up in my mind, you know what? I would amount to nothing. Nothing good would ever happen to me. So that was it for me. I just shut down. I was like, that's it. I'm just going to live life until God decides it's time for me to leave this earth. But as it relates to anything that I wanted to accomplish, I was done with that. I wasn't even going to think of anything good happening to me, because for me it was never going to happen. So that's how things shifted to even a more, what should I say, sad state for me as an individual.
And you said you were 20, around 20 by this time.
Around that time, and it was hard, because you're an adult officially, and you're struggling with things like that. So even in church, is like I am participating in almost everything, because I attended basically a family church. Everybody in church was family. So you had to be involved naturally, and I was basically going through the motions, because it's like, I know I love God and I want to serve God. I want to be a part of the family of God, but the reality is I don't fit in. I don't belong. So I just went ahead, lived each day as it came, not expecting anything great, because great never happened to me, and nobody will never understand me, etc.
Join us next week as we continue to hear the remainder of Natasha's story.